Jupiter and His Mighty Company by James Baldwin. A long time ago, when the world was much younger than it is now, people told and believed a great many wonderful stories about wonderful things which neither you nor I have ever seen. They often talked about a certain mighty being called Jupiter or Zeus, who was king of the sky and the earth, and they said that he sat most of the time amid the clouds on the top of a very high mountain, where he could look down and see everything that was going on in the earth beneath. He liked to ride on the storm clouds and hurl burning thunderbolts right and left among the trees and rocks. And he was so very, very mighty that when he nodded, the earth quaked, the mountains trembled and smoked, the sky grew black, and the sun hid his face. Jupiter had two brothers, both of them terrible fellows, but not nearly so great as himself. The name of one of them was Neptune or Poseidon, and he was the king of the sea. He had a glittering golden palace far down in the deep sea caves where the fishes live, and the red coral grows, and whenever he was angry, the waves would rise, mountain high, and the storm winds would howl fearfully, and the sea would try to break over the land, and men called him the shaker of the earth. The other brother of Jupiter was a sad, pale-faced being whose kingdom was underneath the earth, where the sun never shone, and where there was darkness and weeping and sorrow all the time. His name was Pluto or Athena, and his country was called the lower world, or the land of shadows, or Hades. Men said that whenever anyone died, Pluto would send his messenger or shadow leader to carry that one down into his cheerless kingdom, and for that reason they never spoke well of him, but thought of him only as the enemy of life. A great number of other mighty beings lived with Jupiter amid the clouds on the mountaintop, so many that I can name a very few. Only there was Venus, the queen of love and beauty, who was fairer by far than any woman that you or I have ever seen. There was Athena, or Minerva, the queen of the air, who gave people wisdom and taught them how to do very many useful things. There was Juno, the queen of earth and sky, who sat at the right hand of Jupiter and gave him all kinds of advice. There was Mars, the great warrior, whose delight was in the din of battle. There was Mercury, the swift messenger, who had wings on his cap and shoes, and who flew from place to place. Like the summer clouds, when they are driven before the wind, there was a Vulcan, a skillful blacksmith who had his forge in a burning mountain, and wrought many wonderful things of iron and copper and gold. And besides these there were many others about whom you will learn by and by, and about whom men told strange and beautiful stories. They lived in glittering golden mansions, high up among the clouds, so high indeed that the eyes of men could never see them, but they could look down and see what men were doing. And oftentimes they were said to leave their lofty homes and wander, unknown across the land or over the sea. And of all these mighty folk, Jupiter was by far the mightiest Jupiter, and his mighty folk had not always dwelt amid the clouds on the mountaintop in times long past. A wonderful family called Titans had lived there and had ruled over all the world. There were 12 of them, 6 brothers and 6 sisters, and they said that their father was the sky and their mother, the earth. They had the form and looks of men and women, but they were much larger and far more beautiful. The name of the youngest of these Titans was Saturn, and yet he was so very old that men often called him father. Time, he was the king of the Titans, and so of course was the king of all the earth. Besides, men were never so happy as they were during Saturn's reign. It was the true golden age. Then springtime lasted all the year. The woods and meadows were always full of blossoms, and the music of singing birds was heard every day, and every hour. It was summer and autumn too. At the same time, apples and figs and oranges always hung ripe from the trees. And there were purple grapes on the vines and melons and berries of every kind, which the people had but to pick and eat. Of course, nobody had to do any kind of work. In that happy time, there was no such thing as sickness or sorrow or old age. Men and women lived for hundreds and hundreds of years and never became grey or wrinkled or lame, but were always handsome and young. They had no need of houses, for there were no cold days, nor storms, nor anything to make them afraid. Nobody was poor, for everybody had the same precious things: the sunlight, the pure air, the wholesome water of the springs, the grass for a carpet, the blue sky for a roof, the fruits and flowers of the woods and meadows. So, of course, no one was richer than another, and there was no money, nor any locks or bolts, for everybody was everybody's friend, and no man wanted to get more of anything than his neighbors had. When these happy people had lived long enough, they fell asleep, and their bodies were seen no more. They flitted away through the air and over the mountains, and across the sea, to a flowery land in the distant west. And some men say that even to this day they are wandering happily hither and thither about the earth, causing babies to smile in their cradles, easing the burdens of the toil-worn and sick, and blessing mankind everywhere. What a pity it is that this golden age should have come to an end. But it was Jupiter and his brothers who brought about the sad change. It is hard to believe it. But men say that Jupiter was the son of the old Titan king Saturn, and that he was hardly a year old when he began to plot how he might wage war against his father. As soon as he was grown up, he persuaded his brothers Neptune and Pluto and his sisters Juno, Ceres, and Vesta to join him, and they vowed that they would drive the Titans from the earth. Then followed a long and terrible war. But Jupiter had many mighty helpers. A company of one-eyed monsters called Cyclopes were kept busy all the time forging thunderbolts in the fire of burning mountains. 3 other monsters, each with 100 hands, were called in to throw rocks and trees against the stronghold of the Titans. And Jupiter himself hurled his sharp lightning darts so thick and fast that the woods were set on fire, and the water in the rivers boiled with the heat. Of course, good quiet old Saturn and his brothers and sisters could not hold out always against such foes as these. At the end of 10 years they had to give up and beg for peace. They were bound in chains of the hardest rock and thrown into a prison in the lower worlds, and the Cyclops and the 100-handed monsters were sent there to be their jailers and to keep guard over them forever. Then men began to grow dissatisfied with their lot. Some wanted to be rich and owned all the good things in the world. Some wanted to be kings and rule over the others. Some who were strong wanted to make slaves of those who were weak. Some broke down the fruit trees in the woods, lest others should eat of the fruit. Some, for mere sport, hunted the timid animals, which had always been their friends. Some even killed these poor creatures and ate their flesh for food at last. Instead of everybody being everybody's friend, everybody was everybody's foe. So in all the world, instead of peace, there was war instead of plenty. There was starvation instead of innocence. There was crime, and instead of happiness, there was misery. And that was the way in which Jupiter made himself so mighty, and that was the way in which the Golden Age came to an end. In those old times there lived 2 brothers who were not like other men, nor yet like those mighty ones who lived upon the mountaintop. They were the sons of one of those Titans who had fought against Jupiter and been sent in chains to the strong prison house of the lower world. The name of the elder of these brothers was Prometheus, or for thought, for he was always thinking of the future and making things ready for what might happen tomorrow or next week or next year, or it may be in 100 years to come. The younger was called Epimetheus, or afterthought, for he was always so busy thinking of yesterday or last year or 100 years ago that he had no care at all for what might come to pass. After a while, for some cause, Jupiter had not sent these brothers to prison. With the rest of the Titans, Prometheus did not care to live amid the clouds on the mountaintop. He was too busy for that. While the mighty folk were spending their time in idleness, drinking nectar and eating ambrosia, he was intent upon plans for making the world wiser and better than it had ever been before he went out amongst men to live with them and help them, for his heart was filled with sadness when he found that they were no longer happy as they had been during the golden days when Saturn was king. Oh, how very poor and wretched they were! He found them living in caves and in holes of the earth, shivering with the cold because there was no fire, dying of starvation, hunted by wild beasts, and by one another the most miserable of all living creatures if they only had fire. Said Prometheus to himself, they could at least warm themselves and cook their food, and after a while they could learn to make tools and build themselves houses without fire. They are worse off than the beasts. Then he went boldly to Jupiter and begged him to give fire to men, so that they might have a little comfort through the long dreary months of winter. Not a spark will I give, said Jupiter. Know indeed why men had fire, they might become strong and wise like ourselves. And after a while they would drive us out of our kingdom. Let them shiver with cold, and let them live like the beasts. It is best for them to be poor and ignorant, so that we